Hello, my name is Peyton Harris. I'm a senior in the psychology program at the University of Charleston. I am here today to talk about my proposed study on the colorblind ideology of college students. I was first very interested in the dynamic on a college campus, and with our demographic being pretty even, I'd say, in terms of African American Caucasian population, I really wanted to see whether or not there was an issue with racism or discrimination on this campus. So last semester I had actually done a correlational analysis on modern racism and whether or not it correlated with race, seeing with African American and Caucasian students. I had looked into whether or not African Americans had experienced discrimination or prejudice things, even any type of form of racism. I was actually pretty surprised to find that they really did experience a good amount, especially on this campus. And I was also a little bit surprised to find that there were a good amount of Caucasian people on this campus that participated on my survey that did hold a lot of prejudice towards African Americans. So this semester, when coming up with an experimental design, I was very interested in expanding on that idea with the modern racism scale, and I had come into contact with a new form of racism that's being seen, and it's referred to as colorblind racism, and that's when people don't see race, or they don't think that racism is an issue. They choose not to acknowledge anybody's race because they think that's the best thing to do, even though that is like kind of contributing to the issue of racism. So when developing my new study, the focus was still on racism and prejudice, with the main focus on African American and Caucasian subjects. However, instead of just the inclusion of the modern racism scale and whether the questions correlated with race, I included the colorblind racism scale as well to see if those two scales would correlate with one another. And I hypothesized that those who were presented with the manipulation of the study would be more likely to score high on the colorblind racism scale, and those who hold prejudice will also score high on the modern racism scale. I wanted to see who would agree with colorblind ideology do in fact hold more racist or prejudiced attitudes, and that would come out in the modern racism scale on their score in that. The first condition a participant can be part of in this experimental design is they could be put into the overt racist condition, and that gives just a dialogue, like a few examples of overt and evident racist comments from an anonymous person. It's just written in the folder in a piece of paper that they are instructed to read. And the other group they could be randomly assigned to is a subtle racist condition. This is the less overt and evident, more of the modern racism approach that's still there, and it's hypothesized that those who were assigned to the overt racist example will be more inclined to score high on the colorblind ideals to compensate for the racist example that they just were given. However, the participants that hold that prejudice or discrimination will still score high on the modern racism scale. So you'll still see it in both conditions. I just believe that with the more overt racist comments and examples that they're given, they're going to be more inclined to act as if they feel that race is not an issue. And this design is an independent t-test design with one independent variable with two groups. And when I was expanding my research, I was really intrigued with the ideology of colorblind racism. So when it came to developing my new study, I really wanted to include that in there. Unfortunately, when I did come up with that, that was just strictly correlational because I wanted to see that relationship between the colorblind ideology and colorblind racism with modern racism, because I believe that those do highly correlate with the research that I had found. And I definitely think that this study will be very interesting to see, especially on this campus and with the information that I had already found. I think that there will be a lot more surprises when it comes to people who do hold prejudice and are very discriminatory towards the opposing race, whether that be African American against Caucasian or Caucasian against African American. I think that those are both very evident things that we're going to see. And I just really want to see how my manipulation will turn out, because I was struggling a lot in terms of that, and I wonder if it'll be a good manipulation, if my hypothesis is strong, and whether or not I will actually see what I think that I'm going to see based on my past research. But other than that, that's my study, and thank you for listening.